We're continuing with Chapter 28 of Barry and the Boys, the CIA, the Mob, and America's Secret History by Daniel Hopsicker. Scream a little, scream with me. When the DEA chose Screamer as the code name for a massive operation in the early 1980s, the Screamer, a Colombian bird that flies at night, immediately gained a certain immortality in some circles in Miami. The 18-month investigation was ostensibly denied to penetrate southern Florida's extensive drug trade. Prosecutors brought a total of 85 indictments against a mixed bag of pilots, drug financiers, and laborers known as offloaders. When the indictments were made public in the early 1983, agents busily scooped up defendants in North Carolina, Florida, Colorado, California, Louisiana, Texas, and Virginia. Undercover DEA agents had set up in favorite smuggler hangouts, which were numerous across from Monty's Seafront Restaurant, for example, the sprawling Bayside Eatery Bar Marina in Coconut Grove, sat the rotting hulk of the infamous Mutiny Hotel, the vortex of Miami's cocaine-fueled party in the late 70s and early 80s, a favored hangout for drug dealers renowned for its anything and everything's served bashes. Carlos Lidier made regular pit stops at the Mutiny while passing through Miami, as did conspirators in the $1.5 billion drug smuggling operation that used Pan Am planes to move cocaine from Brazil to New York's Kennedy Airport in the early 80s. It became the favored venue for DEA agents to tape record meetings with their drug smuggler prey in the Screamer investigation. The mutiny, according to Miami Police Department Detective D.C. Diaz, was where it was at. That's where the major narcotics traffickers went, the cocaine cowboys. That was the in place. In addition to Barry Seal, among the most ardent customers were Willie Falcon and Sal Malguta, acquitted of charges that they imported more than 75 tons of cocaine valued at more than $2 billion over a 13-year period. Lots of arrests and deals went down there, and at Monty Trainers, recalled one DEA agent involved. What a better place to meet. Dopers would bring their loads in and they'd celebrate afterwards in their boats. They loved that, Jim Shedd, spokesman for the agency's Miami office, agreed. They liked places on the water. They pull up in their boats, a babe on each arm, and are like, dude. When the agents fanned out to make Operation Screamer's first arrests, Barry Seal was supposed to have been picked up, but spending a lifetime working in intelligence has its advantages. Seal was tipped off and went on the lam for 6 weeks before turning himself in. The naturally flamboyant Seal's idea of going on the lam differed markedly from that of most wanted men. Seal, for example, sent an underling to land a helicopter in the backyard of his suburban home, pick up his wife and kids on the fly, and spirit them to a secret airfield where a Lear jet waited to fly them out to Vegas to spend Easter gambling at the tables. Seal's laid-back attitude was hard for others caught in Screamer to adopt. One renowned smuggler, Jim Petit, greeted police at his door with a 5-gallon can of kerosene, a candle, and a handgun, barricaded himself in his home for nearly 5 hours when police attempted to serve their warrant, and then set his house on fire. A glance at the people swept up with Seal in Operation Screamer reveals names we've already become familiar with, of people with whom Seal had been associating since the Bay of Pigs. Havana mobster Norman Roughhouse Rothman, one of Santos Traficante's close allies, who had run a Havana casino, Barry and the enterprising Mr. Rothman, the slot machine king of Cuba, had both been running guns to Cuba. William Obi Obrant, who newspapers called the Montreal Controni family financier, The family helping out our boy Fidel with those stolen securities back in '57. Obi, then living in Miami Beach, was known as the Meyer Lansky of Canadian organized crime, and James Boy of Florida Aircraft Leasing, who had provided the DC-4 airplane in the explosives deal in 1972. Boy later will provide cargo planes for many of the illegal weapons flights to the Contras. Not for the first time, we wondered, could Operation Screamer's true purpose have been to ensure the cooperation of the larger smuggling community in George Bush and Bill Casey's MENA operation? Recounted in newspapers, books, and movies, the official story of Seal's Screamer bust said Seal became involved with some new people as business partners in Miami. One of them turned him in. A critical mistake had been made in Florida, where Seal had decided to expand operations after Roger Reeves was snared, who disappeared after his indictment. Seal made a bad mistake doing business with an informant who worked for Randy Beasley, the agent in charge of Operation Screamer. The informant led Beasley right to the hotspot pilot from Louisiana. Seal was willing to fly Quaaludes out of South America. Agent Beasley called the DEA in Baton Rouge, according to his accounts in Kings of Cocaine. Hey, I got a guy. He's a pilot. He's from Baton Rouge, and they call him El Gordo. Beasley said, the fat one. We know who you've got, and if you've got him, we're going to come down and kiss you, replied Charlie Bremer, the agent in Baton Rouge. We've been working him 10 years, and we've never been able to get him. Based on informant's testimony and wiretapped phone conversations, a federal grand jury in Fort Lauderdale indicted Seal in March of 1983 for smuggling 200,000 Quaaludes. His name and several of his aliases finally made the papers, but in small print along with 83 others, only Barry was listed twice, though which might have given him some small satisfaction, as Alder Barry Seal, Bill Elders Gordo Seal, and Alder Bill Seal. Either way, his cover was intact. He was known as Ellis Mackenzie in South America. Immediately, Barry began playing Let's Make a Deal, approaching Beasley with an offer to flip, turn informant, and go undercover, promising more cocaine than the agents had ever seen. But he wasn't specific, and he wanted to travel outside the country with very little control by the DEA. What an ego, Beasley thought, related in Lean and Gugliotta's Kings of Cocaine. He thinks he's untouchable, and even has his own conditions for the government. He wanted the charges dropped against two of his men who had been caught up in Screamer. All this was said to have made Beasley uneasy, and he turned Seal down flat. Curiously, Bill Clinton and Barry Seal both shared the same attorney at this time, Richard Benveniste, the former Watergate prosecutor. Benveniste will do double duty, first participating in a scandal he will later investigate, when a decade later he will be Democratic co-counsel for the Congressional Whitewater Committee. Benveniste reportedly provided helpful in steering the committee away from the rocky shoals of Clinton's possible involvement in the drug smuggling through MENA into the calmer waters of presidential blowjobs. In what follows, one fact must be remembered. Barry Seal was deathly afraid of doing time. He was used to flying the wide open spaces. He couldn't stand to be cooped up. He got claustrophobic, his widow Debbie told us. Going to jail would have meant the end, he thought. Had he been willing to do a few years in prison, he could have avoided his ultimate demise. Concurring Seal's Baton Rouge attorney Louis Unglesby, when his offer to become a DEA informant in exchange for leniency was rejected, Seal made a similar proposal to the U.S. Attorney in Baton Rouge, Stan Bardswell, through an intermediary, today sitting judge in Louisiana. Leo Higginbotham took $25,000 in cash and a brown paper bag for his troubles. No doubt Judge Higginbotham later dutifully reported this bribe as commission income on his income taxes. But this offer was met with a cold shoulder. While both Higginbotham and Bardswell were grade school chums of Barry's, Bardswell was suspicious of Seal's intent. He knew Seal was also currently under investigation by a state and federal task force in Baton Rouge and New Orleans, and refused to see him. He explained to us because Barry Seal's request was too cryptic. Facing the increasing likelihood of a long prison sentence, the federal judge in whose court he had just been convicted was known as a hanging judge. Seal then went over everybody's head to Washington, D.C. He had help from his lawyer, Richard Benveniste. I did my part by launching him into the arms of Vice President Bush, who embraced him as an undercover operative, Benveniste later told the Wall Street Journal. Barry Seal appeared before George Bush's Vice President Task Force on Drugs in Washington, where he appeared to dazzle him with smuggling lore and how he had made millions in the trade, as he called it. But what caught the panel's attention was the bombshell Seal dropped during his closed-door testimony, that the Sandinistas were directly involved in drug trafficking into the United States. According to Seal, the Medellin cartel had made a deal with the Sandinistas, awarding them hefty cuts of drug profits in exchange for the use of an airfield in Managua as a transshipment point for narcotics. Presto, Seal had said 3 magic words: commie, dope, peddlers. And the faster you can say being connected never means having to say you're sorry. Drug smuggler Barry Seal was transformed overnight from major felon to star informant. Neat trick. Here, then, is the most amazing fact about Barry Seal. Through the simple expedient of ratting out a country, Nicaragua, with which the Reagan administration was dying to go to war, he walked away from felony drug convictions for which tens of thousands of American citizens are today doing life in prison. Under pressure from Bush's task force, the DEA now agreed to enlist Seal as an undercover informant with a special emphasis on the Nicaraguan connection. Seal then flew his famous Nicaragua sting operation in an acquired C-123 military cargo plane, the famous Fat Lady, which resulted in Ronald Reagan going on television to denounce the Sandinistas as drug smugglers corrupting American youth, waving pictures taken from the back of Barry Seal's plane showing Pablo Escobar helping to load the plane. The Nicaraguan sting led to the indictment of the leadership of the Medellin cartel, including Jorge Ochoa. In retaliation, Ochoa, or so goes the official story, then had Seal murdered in early 1986, both for revenge and to keep Seal from testifying at his, Ochoa's, U.S. trial. That Ochoa never stood trial in the United States is inconvenient knowledge, and it has done nothing to slow the disinformation campaign claiming Ochoa did it. That began the night Seal was assassinated, February 19th, 1986. What did happen? Start here. In Miami, sometime in early 1981, a clump of men stood around the trunk of a rented car, opened for inspection of its contents. A drug deal was about to be consummated in the South. Excuse me. Oh, dear. A drug deal was about to be consummated in the South Florida sunshine, an event so common as to barely raise eyebrows. The trunk everyone was peering into was stuffed with hundreds of pounds of Quaaludes. Soon somebody flashed a badge. 2 members of Seal smuggling organization, Calvin Briggs and Gary Seville, were cuffed. Almost immediately they began to sing. This is also known as rolling on your boss. The man arrested as Calvin Briggs in Miami in 1981 wasn't Briggs, we learned. It had instead been Barry Seal's trusted co-pilot, Emil Camp, who gave Briggs' name instead of his own. But Calvin Briggs is the man who later went to jail for the crime. Whether fool or stand-up guy, the important point is Briggs was trusted by Seal. This, which will be crucial to remember when we see Briggs in the next chapter, fronting for Seal in a money laundering dummy corporation. The official story of Seal being caught up in Operation Screamer insists that Barry knew nothing about the secret sealed indictment pending against him, as if he woke up one morning in 1983, 2 full years after his men got popped, and was shocked shocked to learn that he was now about to be arrested for that trunk full of lewds he caused to be in a rental car in Miami 2 years earlier. This is nonsense, but instructive nonsense because it conceals, or has until now, what really happened when Seal learned that 2 of his men had gone down in a drug bust in Miami 1981. Barry Seal shortly thereafter moved his operation to Mina. In criminal parlance, it's called working off a beef. Barry was immediately concerned when Gary Seville and Calvin Briggs were popped with a carload of lewds in Miami, then got printed and released less than 6 hours later, a Seal associate told us. The handwriting was on the wall right away. Seal immediately knew when 2 of his men were busted that it was only a matter of time before they would be coming for him. In Seal's world and the DEA's world, the 2-year secret sealed indictment naming Barry Seal was no more secret to Seal than what he had for breakfast that morning. When Calvin Briggs and Gary Seville got popped in Miami in the spring of 1981, Barry Seal was as good as gone to Mina. Barry got lured into working outside his area, said a Louisiana law enforcement official whose job had been tracking Seal. He was just trying to take care of his distribution chain, which needed a constant flow of product, and he got caught. Seal probably figured out who the snitch was, this official continued in a grudging statement of respect for the man he'd hunted. Anybody else who have killed that guy, anybody else who have killed the guy, but Barry wasn't violent. We all have to give him that. We had heard persistent rumors that the real objective of Operation Screamer had been to do what the DEA said to have been set up to do in the first place: reduce freelance penetration in the lucrative drug trade. But beyond busting the competition, there may have been another covert objective as well: recruitment. Busting a pilot and then taking care of the bust for services rendered is standard operating procedure in the agency, said lawyer and former CIA pilot Gary Ediel. It's called being compromised. In the official story, Seal became a snitch and went to work for the DEA only after he was convicted in Operation Screamer. But Seal's response to his upcoming indictment can be read by what he did in April of 1982. He moved to Mina, and working off his impending beef was probably just one of the inducements. For the next 2 years, based in Mina, he engaged in what Partners in Power calls one of the major crimes of the century. Neither he or his accomplices showed the slightest worry about being caught. The shadow of official complicity and cover-up was unmistakable in Seal's papers, Denton Morris wrote. Those who met Seal in Mina in the fall of 1983 found him at the zenith of his influence, said Partners in Power, already a businessman of note in Arkansas. With an address book listing some of the state's well-known names, contacts in Little Rock's banks and brokerage houses, and what a fellow CIA operative called a night depository for bags of cash dropped from green flights onto the ranch of a politically and financially prominent Arkansas family. A pilot who came to Mina from Louisiana with Seal in 1982 later testified about their first weeks in Arkansas. When they were introduced to pivotal figures in state government and business, Barry Seal knew them all, and they knew him and the Clinton machine. He remembered, there was no limit on cooperation by the good old boys, a federal agent would say to Seal's Arkansas friend. Senior law enforcement officials happening onto his tracks in Arkansas were quickly waved off. Joe, name deleted, works for Seal and cannot be touched because Seal works for the CIA. a customs official noted during an investigation into Arkansas's drug trafficking in the early 1980s. Look, we're told not to touch anything that has Barry Seal's name on it, another ranking federal agent told a colleague. Just let it go. At the zenith of his influence is an accurate depiction of Seal in 1983. His records show that he had more smuggling planes in the air that year than any other. He had a fleet. Still, we found it curious. How can a man under indictment on serious felony charges, which could put him in prison for the rest of his life, be at the same time at the zenith of his influence? Author Rodney Stitch hinted at some of the dark secrets of Operation Screamer in his recent book, Drugging America. Navy SEAL Commander Robert Hunt put Stitch in contact with CIA operative and State Department employee Michael Mahaly, whose primary duty had been monitoring cable traffic at different CIA locations. Mahaly described his role in Operation Screamer, which was a mammoth sting operation aimed at penetrating the network of mercenary pilots that were flying drugs in competition with the CIA, Stitch writes. On this operation, Mahaly worked under DEA agent in charge, Randy Beasley. Mahaly describes how Seal offered to turn informant, allegedly implicating high federal officials, including former Watergate prosecutor Richard Benveniste. Barry Seal, Mahaly said, had tried to roll on his own attorney, Democratic power broker Richard Benveniste. What a concept. Why? Whatever for? Was this just more conspiracy-mongering balderdash? Then, in Barry Seal's files, we discovered Mahaly had been telling the truth. Correspondence between Seal and Benveniste, which we will shortly quote, will prove Mahaly right. Stitch's account said Mahaly was a liaison officer for the United States Embassy in Panama and worked for the U.S. State Department and CIA for over 2 decades, and he printed a State Department letter confirming Mahaly's employment. Mahaly told Stitch he had frequent contacts with Oliver North, SEAL Commander Hunt, and Barry Seal. Seal had stated had been involved with the Noriega cartel in a top-secret operation. He described the methods used by Seal's fleet of aircraft hauling drugs, saying they flew mostly at night, with the pilots using night vision goggles to slip through airspace windows when the military radar would ignore the targets. This was consistent with information received from a longtime CIA agent, to whom Seal had once handed the sophisticated portable electronics unit after landing. Engineered by E-Systems in Houston, Texas, it was a highly classified encoding device to evade air defense and surveillance measures, which allowed Seal to fly with impunity across U.S. borders. The portable device had been far more valuable than the airplane it came off of. Venezuelan naval officer Lizardo Marquez Perez was in charge of the smuggling operations in Miami and frequently seen on the CIA oil rigs on which Mahaly was stationed. Mahaly told Stitch, "We knew Marquez was one of the Medellin's small fry lieutenants put in prison by Barry Seal's snitch testimony." Barry Seal's archives contain information indicting that Seal's relationship with Richard Benveniste was not his only close tie with a top Democratic chieftain. In a handwritten note in Seal's own hand, he underlines the statement that Charles Manat was the personal attorney for Gene Glick, who we've seen was a cutout between Seal and his real bosses. Charles Manat, throughout the early and mid-1980s, was the chairman of the Democratic National Committee. But the big revelation was in the letter we found in Seal's files from Richard Benveniste to client Barry Seal. In it, Benveniste pointedly states that he has been trying to reach Seal by phone for several weeks. But Seal, then on trial for charges which could send him to prison for life, won't return his calls. I have attempted to reach you by phone, leaving several messages, and have in addition left word with John Stale and Roy Folger to pass along my request that you phone me, Benveniste writes. He goes on to complain that there has obviously been a breakdown in communication between the two men. The result of the breakdown quickly becomes clear. Benveniste demands for what he states in the third or fourth time, that Barry Seal return my 2 briefcases of legal materials which you have been holding. Why would Barry Seal be holding and refusing to return 2 briefcases of material from Richard Benveniste's office? One obvious conclusion is that whatever it was that Barry Seal took from Richard Benveniste's offices was exactly what was attempting to parlay into leniency in sentencing. And from Benveniste's frantic tone in his letter, we can only guess how powerfully incriminating that material must have been. What could Barry Seal have on the Democratic power broker Richard Benveniste that he thought would save him from prosecution on major drug felonies? Were there any other indications that Benveniste, an intimate after all of the President of the United States, might be linked to the drug trade? Well, yes. We, the New York City Police Department, knew Benveniste was a bagman. Retired NYPD Detective Jimmy Rothstein told us. We saw him with known mob associates we were following. Barry was going to roll on Benveniste. Right? Barry's associate Blackie confirmed. He was also offering to turn in Attorney General Ed Meese. There was an IRS agent, William Duncan, who lost his job for asking questions after Barry was dead about the... William Duncan, who lost his job for asking questions after Barry was dead about the $300,000 bribe Seal paid to Meese. Blackie's statement is corroborated by numerous accounts of IRS agent William Duncan having been hounded from his career for attempting to present evidence to Congress of a $300,000 bribe Seal allegedly paid to Meese. Blackie's statement is corroborated by numerous accounts of IRS agents. William Duncan having been hounded from his career for attempting... I just read that. For attempting to present evidence to Congress of a $300,000 bribe to Seal allegedly paid to Meese. Seal's offer to Screamer prosecutors was the ultimate in politically ecumenical offers, containing incriminating information on the activities of a Republican attorney general and a Democratic backroom fixer. But wait a minute, we protested. Hadn't Benveniste been one of the good guys in Watergate? One of the bright and idealistic young lawyers who had served the country on the Watergate Committee, even if it was alongside Hillary Rodham Clinton? Here we were called to mind our earlier discovery that Richard Nixon had not been brought down by the righteous wrath of the American people, but by the CIA. This places Benveniste's role in Watergate, not to mention Hillary's, in an entirely different light. Navy Lieutenant Commander Alexander Martin was an assistant to Major General Richard Secord and worked closely with Oliver North, Felix Rodriguez, and Jeb Bush, the son of Vice President Bush, in Operation Black Eagle, he has stated. Take a look at the Trinity of Energy, Martin advised us. In 1982, Richard Benveniste incorporated a Trinity Oil or Trinity Energy to launder money for his client Barry Seal. A cursory glance through newspaper records showed Martin knew something. In 1995, Seal's partner, Baton Rouge attorney Michael Roy Folger, sold a Trinity Energy Corp. And related companies for $22 million to a shadowy company which we learned was suspected of being controlled by the old man Jackson Stevens. Stevens had been selling the company in effect to himself. That's how they pay themselves, a Seal associate explained. Trinity Energy, a Delaware-listed company which dissolved in 1992, had as their listed phone number in incorporation documents in Delaware's Secretary of State's office, a number which rings at a company called ICF Kaiser International. Its chairman, a man who had sat on the board for over 9 years, was Tony Coelho, a former Democratic congressman. When we discovered this information, Coelho was running Vice President Al Gore's presidential campaign. What did savvy lifelong member of clandestine services Barry Seal do when he got in trouble in Miami of 1981? He went looking for someone to fix things. Enter Richard Benveniste. But to work off his beef, Seal needed a willing partner with the clout to take care of his legal difficulties, and thanks to Benveniste, he found one in George Bush. It was time to take a little closer look at Richard Benveniste. And that's it for today.